In the anthropology of food and eating, the relationships between food and power are explored. Since food is one of our fundamental needs for survival, whoever gets a hold of our access to food will have a strong influence over us. Aside from political power, there are other types of hegemonies and inequalities that are observed through the lens of food and eating. One of these is punk cuisine, which is discussed in Dylan Clark's The Raw and the Rotten. To give a brief summary, we have outlined Clark's article into 9 parts. The article commences with the Black Cat and its origins. The Black Cat is a cafe located in Seattle. It is a haven for people called punks and their hindered spirits, an assortment of young adults who exercised and debated punk praxis in and through the cafe's premises. So, what is punk? Being punk is a way of critiquing privileges and challenging social hierarchies. Contemporary punks are inspired by anarchism, which they understand to be a way of life in favor of egalitarianism and environmentalism, against sexism, racism, and corporate domination. The ideologies of punk are evident in their routines, in conversation, travels, as well as their approach to food. With this, Clark analyzed punk cuisine through the lens of Claude Lévi-Strauss' tripolar gastronomic system. In this system, the renowned French anthropologist defines raw, cooked, and rotten as categories basic to all human cuisines. This model is useful for analyzing punk cuisine and punk culture. Punks believe that industrial food fills a person's body with the norms, rationales, and moral pollution of corporate capitalism and imperialism. Punk cuisine is best discussed as a cultural mechanism responsible for its own logic and in dialogue with what punks perceive to be normative culture. With this, Clark applied Levi Strauss' concept of culinary triangle, which provides a helpful way to think about how the transformation of food can be cognitively mapped. For instance, the industrial food products are milled, refined, butchered, baked, packaged, branded, and advertised. Punks consider industrial food to be extraordinary cooked and in turn preferentially seek food that is more raw, that is closer to wild, organic, and uncultured state. Punks even enjoy food that has, from an American perspective, become rotten, disposed of, or stolen. Punks regularly liken mainstream food biographies to colonialism because of their association with the Third World, destruction of rainforests, which are allegedly cleared for beef production, the creation of cash cropping to service World Bank debts, and cancer. To this end, by wallowing corporate food in dumpsters or by stealing natural foods from an upscale grocery store, punk food is, in a sense, decommodified, stripped of its alienating qualities, and restored to a kind of pure use value as bodily sustenance. Going back to the Black Cat, the cafe was boxy structured enclosed by a jagged rampart of fencing and discarded materials. It enclosed the yard, scattered benches, tables, and cigarette butts. Scrap wood planters held salvage greenery. The place looked more like a junkyard than a restaurant, as it violated normal aesthetic conventions associated with dining. Unlike other restaurants, the cafe did not strive to declare sanitation and safety. It was cluttered and soiled, with its interior covered with posters, art, and canvas coffee sacks. It was packed with bulky, dilapidated furniture. The ambience was precisely what drew punks to the Black Cat Collective. The Black Cat food, like the cafe itself, was a declaration of autonomy and organic creation, a rejection of commodification. Meat and dairy products were proudly excluded. Vegetables with peanut sauce, tofu scrambles, and other vegan creations were served as entries. The place and the food rejected strict adherence to conventional conceptions of hygiene, where even the appearance of filth somehow infects the objects or the body. In rejecting the image of sterility, the Black Cat Collective scorned decades of market research and refuted dominant mantras of modernity. In punk cuisine, food is also seen as a vehicle of relations between gender and power. Food displays practices through which unequal gender power is acted out, resisted, and reproduced. The punk ethic has become more committed to anarchist egalitarian principles that celebrate and practice an anti-hierarchical social order, including one that prohibits a hierarchy of gender. For instance, men often receive larger amounts of food and have culinary choices catered to their taste. Feminists also identify this discourse as a form of control over women that at times leave them malnourished, anorexic, or bulimic, and fixated on manipulating their body shape and diets. To end this, punks are critical of the beauty industry and of the commodification of the body. They argue that food is a part of a disciplinary order in which women are taught to have diets and manage their bodies so as to publicly communicate the grammar of patriarchy. Veganism is also upheld in punk cuisine. Various accounts delineate the details of cruelty towards animals, contaminated meat, and unhealthy effects of meat and dairy products on the human body. In the daily practice of punk, vegetarianism and veganism are strategies through which punks combat corporate capitalism, patriarchy, and environmental collapse. At the Black Cat Cafe, punks described that eating animal based products was not only unhealthy, but it participated in the bondage of murder of animals as well. Many punks were concerned about the cruel conditions of factory farms, where animals were kept in cramped quarters, pumped with hormones and antibiotics, and tortured in sundry ways. Near the middle of its tenure, the Black Cat discontinued its use of milk and eggs. A vegetarian cafe from its outset, the cafe became more orthodox when its menu was made completely vegan. The transition to a vegan menu marked a turning point for the collective. In punk cuisine, the degree to which food is processed, sterilized, brand named, and fetished is the degree to which it is corrupted, distanced from nature, and cooked. Whereas industrial agriculture is associated with genetic engineering, monocropping, pesticides, animal cages, chemical fertilizers, and commodification, raw food tends toward wildness and complexity. Punks receive everyday American food as an abject modernity, a synthetic destroyer of locality and diversity. Through the most sophisticated branding, packaging, and advertising, American food commodities work hard to conceal the labor, spatial divides, and resources that went into making the food. In modern advertising, images of food often divert attention from the industrialized production of food and draw attention to its consumption. These postmodern geographies, along with the relentless commodification, heightens the fetishism of commodity, hiding as much as possible the making of a product, alienating condition of production and cooking in the extreme. Raw foods, which to say organic, homegrown, bartered food, was one way punks resisted the spread of monoculture. Not far from the Black Cat Cafe, Seattle hosted a variety of natural food retailers who attracted both the contempt and the palates of punks. Such places offered organically grown foods marketed to an upscale clientele. Indeed, the natural foods industry in 1990s, Seattle was a part of a vast reconfiguration of food in America, which witnessed a hitherto unprecedented niche marketing of what punks saw as foods which fed egos more than bodies. The punk narrative critic of the natural foods movement was extended by stealing, for by this food was remade. Punks regard this food, while ostensibly pure and simple, as much commodities as the food products that precede them, and derisively locate individualistic and white behavior in an expensive obsession of one's own purity and health. The natural foods industry, then, is a target of punk critical practices. In Seattle, the Budget Consumers Co-op, or PCC, bore the brunt of the punk natural food critic. Fashionable, expensive, and allegedly catering to a mostly white and upscale clientele, the PCC was scorned by punks. The high prices and upscale marketing represented the cooking of food and heightened state of gastronomic fetishism from which punk felt alienated. Because of these, many punks, whether as workers or customers, targeted natural foods markets for theft. Their behavior suggests an axiom of punk culinary geometry. In the act of being stolen, heavily cooked food is transformed into a more nutritive, gustative state. Stolen foods are outlaw foods, contaminated or rotten to the mainstream, but a delicacy in punk cuisine. Each night, American supermarkets and restaurants fill their dumpsters with food, and each night, punks arrive to claim some of it. A host of foods become rotten in corporate capitalism food production. Food with an advanced expiration date, cosmetically damaged produce, food in dented packaging, a day-old baked goods, and the like. To punks, it was obscene that businesses were trashing good food. Unlike raw foods, dumped food tends to be commercialized, non-organic, and highly processed. Punks, however, were hassled by security guards, store employees, and police merely for taking things out of the dumpster. Not only did the mainstream waste food, it protected its garbages with armed guards. For those punk who were raised white or middle class, dumpsters and dump food dirty their bodies and tarnish their affiliations with a white, Borghese powered structure. On an ecologically strained planet, home to 2 billion hungry people, punks see the reclamation of rotten food as a profoundly radical act. For 5 years of existence, the Black Cat Cafe was a kitchen of Seattle's punk scene. It was decidedly anti-corporate environment where punk food practices helped shape community, symbolize value, and foster group solidarity. At the cafe, feelings of alienation from the mainstream were converted into punk sentiments and channeled into anarchist practices. The cafe welcomed various activist groups that were associated with punk culture. One of the foremost was Food Not Bombs, an anarchist disorganization. It served to collect, prepare, and distribute free food to the homeless and the hungry. By making its political content explicit, food became a primary site of discussion and recruitment. In these movements, punk cuisine took shape, and with it, punks at the Black Cat concocted a daily life of a meaningful situations, anarchist discourse, and resistance to the system. In hindsight, Dylan Clark's The Raw and the Rotten analyzed the phenomenon of punk cuisine, which is based on scavenged, rotten, or stolen food, as a means of challenging the capitalist food system and all its accompanying problems of commodification, hierarchy, toxicity, and environmental destruction. Contemporary punks, largely anarchist, anti-racist, and feminist, use food as a medium to make themselves and to theorize and contest the status quo. Punks politicized food. Punk cuisine is a way to make punk ideas knowable, ritualized, and edible. A way to favor the less mediated anarchist food over the capitalist product, the raw over the cooked. Punk cuisine aspires toward food that is free of brand names, pesticide, and labor exploited, and toward food that is raw as possible. Mainstream American food, with its labor and natural components cooked beyond recognition, is countered with a raw and rotted food of punks. Food that are ideally natural, homegrown, stolen, discarded, and uncommodified. These foodways defined punk cuisine and punk themselves. Beyond the emergence of the punk scene in America, it is important to analyze the relationships between food and power in foreign and global perspectives. Not only are some aspects of punk culture reflected in other countries, but they can also be perceived as microcosm of global food problems. For instance, in the Philippines, people cook garbage food waste, known locally as pagpag, in order to survive. Leftover food from dinners, typically from fast food restaurants, are scavenged from garbage and dump sites. The practice arose from problems of hunger resulting from extreme poverty in the country. Eating pagpag reflects the practice of punks in dumpster diving in order to rebel against the commodification and capitalist view towards food. Food waste is a problem dismissed and overshadowed by other, more pressing global concerns. Wasted food is a significant contributor to climate change. Many resources are required to produce food, and leaving food to decay will lead to emission of potent greenhouse gases like methane. In essence, when food is wasted, the planet is affected. However, among all global problems, the problem of food waste is the easiest to solve. This is done simply through individual practices like decreasing storage space for food and limiting our purchases for food consumption, among many others. Likewise, the punk culture of dumpster diving could be solved by addressing the fundamental problems of food waste. Overall, through his work, The Raw and the Rotten, Punk Cuisine, Dylan Clark allows us to see the anarchist way of challenging the multi-sectoral problems of food and eating. Through the lens of punk cuisine, Clark explored problems on food commodification, egalitarianism, environmentalism, sexism, racism, corporate capitalism, imperialism, and moral pollution, among many others. Punk culture is one among the many problems posed on the relations between food and power, and having awareness of this is ultimately one step closer to solving local and global food problems. We hope you learned a lot from this video. We hope you enjoyed and thank you so much for watching.